Hello, YouTube. There are people who consider the hypothesis or the theory of the creation of the pyramids in Giza in Egypt, described by historians to be an absolute fiction, composed in the expectation that ordinary people will buy everything, trusting certified specialists. And for many years it has been so. But the time has come, according to some independent researchers, when blind faith in the statements of historians, often frankly fantastic, has gone. The data began to be rechecked using the methods of other much more precise sciences, and a completely different picture of the past began to emerge, including in the history of Egypt. Experts in the fields of construction have already convincingly proved the impossibility of erecting these grandiose structures by primitive methods, and the age of the pyramids drawn by historians also raises serious doubts. Nevertheless, most historians continue to insist on the absolute correctness of their theory, despite the fact that this entire theory is based on a single, extremely subjective source, the so-called Westcar Papyrus. This papyrus of Westcar, this was the property of European collectors by whose last name it got its name. This manuscript is a collection of ancient tales, legends, and myths. One of these legends tells that Pharaoh Khufu, also known as Cheops, found an ancient text somewhere, instructions on how to build pyramids, and he built using the described technology. The Temple of Isis, located next to the Great Pyramids, repaired the Sphinx, which was struck by lightning. The size of this temple and technology by which it was built are radically different from the size of pyramids and the technology of their construction. On what basis historians concluded that Khufu Cheops built the pyramid itself, no one has yet explained. So such independent researchers and adherents of alternative history repeat the story of the pyramid of Cheops is based on a legend from papyrus, and the legend was recorded at least 1,000 years after the construction of the pyramid, even according to official data. And in this legend, there's not a word about the construction of the pyramid by Cheops. It was only about the temple. And yet these historians have the audacity to accuse the alternative history adherents of an overblown fantasy. That's how they react, those independent researchers. But there's another source reporting completely different information about the pyramid of Khufu, quite consistent with today's conclusions of technical experts. This is the ancient Egyptian memorial tablet known as the Inventory Stela or Stela, in which it is reported that the pharaoh did not build the pyramid, but only restored it. How did the historians who wrote detail about the Cheops and their spiritual followers who received salaries for rewriting this and many other fairy tales react to this Inventory Stela? That's right, they ignore it. Everything that does not fit into their frame of thinking, those people either hide or destroy. So the Stele is all mostly hidden in the storerooms, according to them. Well, an absolutely scientific approach, right? Well, there is simply no doubt that historians are interested only in the process of cognition and nothing else, that they're exceptional, objective, and honest like newborn babies. These are the simple methods used to create the history that exists today in crooked mirrors. If we want to use knowledge about the past for the development and improvement of society, and not to manipulate it, it is clearly time to write a new, real picture of the past, checking questionable historians with methods of other sciences. And let us recall the words of the great Russian writer, poet, Alexander Sergeyevich Pushkin, who believed that it was not worth trusting history to those who would write it for money. Russia's great poet certainly knew what he was talking about. By the way, at the time when the pyramids were built, the area was not called Giza. it was called Rostau. So now you know the arguments of the alternative history proponents about a very important aspect of ancient history. Let's look today at this very complicated situation, because if the alternative history adherents are right, the entire history of ancient Egypt is in doubt. The world and the pyramids and the Sphinx are much older, and brings up questions of very old advanced terrestrial civilization. Khufu, also known as Khnum and Cheops, was the second pharaoh of ancient Egypt's fourth dynasty. The ancient Greek historian Herodotus describes Khufu or Cheops as a tyrannical and vicious ruler who suppressed the Egyptian temples, forced thousands of people into slavery to build his pyramid, and even commanded his own daughter to become a prostitute to raise money for the project. Another ancient source, the Westcar Papyrus, describes Khufu in much more benevolent terms as an easygoing but intellectually curious ruler. Khufu's reign is generally dated at 23 years, between 2589 2566 before Common Era, though its exact length is unknown. The few dated sources from Khufu's reign all surround a common yet perplexing ancient Egyptian custom: the cattle count. Serving as the tax collection for the whole of Egypt, this was often used to measure time. For example, in the year of the 17th cattle count. Historians are unsure whether cattle counts were held annually or biannually during Khufu's reign, making it difficult to place the time frames measured. From the evidence, he may have reigned for at least 26 to 27 years, possibly 34 years, or as many as 46 years. Built over a period of around 27 years, the Great Pyramid is undoubtedly Khufu's greatest legacy, according to official science. It is the largest pyramid in Giza and the world, and was built as a tomb for the great pharaoh who named it Akhet-Hufu, Horizon of Khufu. Measuring at 481 feet tall, Khufu chose a natural plateau for his vast pyramid so that it could be seen from far and wide. For nearly 4 millennia, it was the tallest building on the planet, until peculiarly being surpassed by Lincoln Cathedral in 1311. Today, it remains the last of the 7 wonders of the ancient world still in existence. And by the way, only one full-body depiction of Khufu himself has been found, and it is tiny. Discovered in 1903 in Abydos, Egypt, the Khufu statuette is around 7.5 centimeters high and features the pharaoh in a seated position wearing the red crown of Lower Egypt. This may have been used by a mortuary cult to the king or as a votive offering in later years. Khufu's children include 9 sons and 6 daughters, including Jedefra and Hafri, who would become pharaohs following his death. There are 3 Khufus that we know of. The first is the real one, the actual man-god who ruled Egypt. We do not know too much about his character other than he commissioned, reportedly, the Great Pyramid, and he ruled right after Sneferu. Then there is the second Khufu, which is described in the not-so-factual accounts of Manetho and Herodotus. In their works, and especially in the latter's, Khufu is painted in a negative light as a cold-blooded tyrant who did not hesitate to force his own daughter into prostitution just to secure the funds for the pyramid. There are reasons to doubt this description. Finally, the third and the last Khufu is the one portrayed in the Westcar Papyrus. This was a character in a work of fiction more than an account of a real person. And this is why, out of all the 3 portraits of Khufu, the real king remains a mystery. Egyptomania was at its peak during the Victorian era of Britain. Wealthy socialites would constantly travel to Egypt in search of hidden treasure and mysteries. And you can read wonderful stories, like including Arthur Conan Doyle, about the mysteries of Egypt, published at that time. In 1825, British adventurer Henry Westcar bought a roll of papyrus as a souvenir from his trip to Egypt. Intrigued by the hieroglyphic text and wanting to know what wonders it contained, Westcar entrusted its translation to German Egyptologist Richard Lepsius, who immediately knew he was before no ordinary Egyptian text. This papyrus Westcar told a series of fictional, albeit educational stories that happened around the time of King Cheops of Khufu, roughly 1,000 years prior to its creation. Well, why are they fictional? The official science will not tell you, but they say it's fictional. All the stories contained in papyrus roll, including that of Khufu and the magician, feature the use of magic, the telling of prophecies, and the performance of miracles, making it a fascinating document on Egyptian beliefs and magical knowledge. So the Westcar Papyrus that dates to the Middle Kingdom consists of popular tales about Khufu. The Egyptians described him sitting with his family listening to stories about their ancestors and the miracles that happened in the past. They also depicted him sending his son to bring the magician Dedi or Jedi, but I think Dedi is correctly, and relate to us a beautiful dialogue between a common man and king. The most important point in these tales is that Khufu could not obtain information from Dedi about the mysterious document of Toth that could help him to build his sepulchral chambers in the pyramid. The papyrus Westcar, as it turned out, contains several loosely connected stories starring King Khufu. However, its date of creation was long after Khufu's death, in the second intermediate period. That's around 1782 to 1570 before Common Era. So very interestingly, it is a work of fiction, again, scientific description, that was set in the distant past, almost 1,000 years prior to its writing. It may well be the first known historical fiction, as they say, as well as the first known magic text. Here's the first story, The Magic of Imhotep. Although in the few remaining parts that can be read, the papyrus is heavily damaged at the beginning and at the end. His name is not mentioned. Imhotep is with all probability the main character in the first story. The story is told from the perspective of one of Khufu's sons, probably Jedefre, and seems to tell the tale of the royal architect Imhotep performed some kind of how this royal architect Imhotep performed some kind of miracle for the king. The text then proceeds to describe in all details the quantity and type of offering King Khufu made for another king, Djoser, and for Imhotep. It is stated that Khufu was highly impressed with the mastery of Egyptian magic or Heka, displayed by Imhotep, but unfortunately we do not know anything about this miracle. The second story was the wax crocodile. We'll skip that one. The third story, the turquoise necklace, we will skip. Now, the fourth story of the Westcar Papyrus, Khufu and the Magician. Another of Khufu's son, Hardedef, tells the fourth story. This is a contemporary tale and it takes place during Khufu's reign. Hardedef is informing his father of a miracle maker who lives in the land of Egypt. His name is Dedi, and among his powers is the ability to reattach an animal's severed head, tame lions and other dangerous animals, and to know the exact number of secret chambers in Thoth's sanctuary. The king is especially interested in this person and has him brought to the palace immediately. He also orders for a goose, an ox, an aquatic fowl, and a criminal that was said to be beheaded. Khufu first asked Dedi to decapitate the criminal and then reattach his head, which the magician refuses. He does, however, perform the exact feat on the animals present in the room, leaving most witnesses in awe. So basically, he resurrected them. After this, the king asks about the sanctuary of Toth, but deity replies that the king has been misinformed. He does not know the number of chambers, but their whereabouts. This is when the story turns into a prophecy, because when the king asks him the exact whereabouts of Thoth's secret chambers, deity again tells him that it is not for him to say that. His prophecy is this: there's a woman in the country of Egypt named Regyadet. This woman will give birth to 3 godly boys who will become kings. The kings' names were already known by the time the Westcar Papyrus was written, and they were Usarkaf, Sakhure, and Nefererir-Kare. As Usarkaf was the first king of the 5th dynasty, it is commonly thought that the prophecy detailed how the 5th dynasty would commence. In this papyrus, Khufu is alleged to be seeking ancient knowledge to apply to the construction of his tomb, the Great Pyramid of Giza. Well, one of the famous translators, Mackenzie, translates the relevant phrase as the secrets of the dwelling of the god Toth, while Blackman, another famous translator, translates the phrase as the number of chambers in the sanctuary of Toth. This is the text. Now, His Majesty, King of Upper and Lower Egypt, Khufu, justified, spent the day seeking for himself the chambers of the sanctuary of Toth in order to make something similar for himself for his horizon pyramid. Unfortunately, the story of the miraculous birth of the 3 kings is incomplete, as the manuscript's end is lost. Notwithstanding the Westcar Papyrus and the story of Khufu and the magician, to this day, they are regarded as one of the finest and most important pieces of ancient Egyptian literature. Now let's look at the Inventory Stele. Stele is an upright or formerly upright slab containing engraved or painted decorations or inscriptions, a stela. The Inventory Stele is a limestone tablet made by an unknown temple scribe during the reign of the 26th Saite dynasty of Egypt's late period, from 664 to 332 before Common Era, to showcase a temple's inventory of precious statues. This was a time when fragmented Egypt had been unified under Psamtik I and made independent from Assyrian rule. The stele was discovered by Auguste Mariette in 1858 near a temple which extends east from Khufu's southernmost Queen Pyramid G1C, and which was expanded in the 26th century before Common Era from earlier beginnings. G1C is one of the subsidiary pyramids of the Giza east field of the Giza necropolis, immediately to the eastern side of the Great Pyramid of Giza, built during the 4th dynasty of Egypt. It is the southern of the 3 pyramids of the queens and is one of Queen Henutsa. Rebuilt at least twice, the temple incorporates G1C's chapel on its western limit and adjacent 4th dynasty mastabas on the eastern end. This temple is known as the Temple of Isis, to whose inventory of statuettes the stele or stela refers. The statuettes listed on the stele are those: Min, Phuaut, Horus or Necheni, Toth, Isis, Nephthys, Serket, Ptah, Sekhmet, Osiris, Apis, Nefer, Tum, Urais, and the Great Sphinx. The last name was statue, and Horemheb. The temple's origin by G1C is believed to be around 1,000 years later, perhaps thought but not proven, the first built during the 18th century of Egypt's New Kingdom. So you see the confusion. Inscribed into the Inventory Stela's frame, lowest register, and pedestal are a few lines of hieroglyphic text which have stirred controversy because they explicitly contradict the nowadays mainstream theory that Khufu's son Khafre constructed the Great Sphinx. The text has been translated by James Henry Breasted in 1906, by George Darcy and Christian Zivi Koch in 1991. It reads as a detailed historical account of Khufu's discovering and rebuilding an old temple, restoring its divine temple statues, building his pyramid and that of his wife Henutzen, repairing a worn and damaged Great Sphinx according to records of its prior image, presenting animal offerings to the gods, surveying a lightning strike sycamore tree, and commemorating these activities on steles for the temple and the Sphinx. This account clearly implies that the Great Sphinx predates the Giza pyramids. There was a very interesting and detailed superb research in Boston University in 2018 by Saifzadeh and Schoch. I will only cite a short passage from it. The Inventory Stela tells a story about Khufu and the Great Sphinx, which contradicts the current mainstream narrative of when the Sphinx was carved. The story's historical relevance has long been challenged based on its mention of names and certain details which are believed to be anachronistic to the time of Khufu. Here we address the elements commonly cited by the critics one by one and find that they are largely based on misconceptions, in part due to errors and oversights contained in the two commonly referenced translations and based on a missing context which relates to the economics and symbolism of supplying provisions to the royal house. We reconstruct a more plausible scenario of why and when the text may have been originally composed and who its target audience was. From our analysis, we conclude that while we cannot rule out a couple of minor modifications of names from the original written version, we date to the 5th dynasty. There is no plausible reason to dismiss the entire account recorded in this late period version on those grounds alone, and that the events it describes appear more factual than fictitious. We feel the inventory still deserves another look by the language experts, and that it needs a new laser scan guided transcription of the no longer legible symbols. Do you see how complicated it is? I don't want to be as drastic as the adherents of the alternative history hypothesis and blame all Egyptologists or historians. It's just very hard to go through, and of course, not everybody wants to go against the mainstream ideology too. That's absolutely, accepted, whether we want to or not. But I have greatest respect, for example, for the Soviet Egyptologists who had very poor faith. Stalin destroyed many of them. And to me, it's very surprising too. And I've talked about it in other videos. But here is something that from my research work, which was published in Russian back in 1996, and the title in English would be Ancient Egyptian Roots of Mexico. And Imhotep was a court scholar and advisor to Pharaoh Djoser, an outstanding king of the 3rd dynasty, 2980 before Common Era. At the great house, this is how the ancient Egyptians called their king, Per-O, from where it came, Pharaoh. There were enormous economic difficulties in the Black Land at that time because the river did not rise for 7 years and the country was in the greatest need. The wise Imhotep, a prolific scientist and statesman, having received the question posed by Djoser about geography, knew where to look for answers. He went to God. That's how it was described by Ivan Yefremov. He went to the sanctuary of the deity Toth, popularly known as one with the nose. He was depicted with the head of an ibis, a bird. to inquire in the souls of Ra. He went, and soon he returned and told me about the raising of the river and all the things related to it. He revealed to me miracles to which no one of the kings of the primordial had yet been shown the way. Now, Ta-Kem, the black earth, or Kemet, colloquially Kem, or it means black. That's what the ancient Egyptians called their country. To whom did Imhotep go for advice? Ivan Antonovich Yefremov, the wonderful Soviet scientist and writer, whom I have spoken to quite extensively and whom the KGB considered to be an extraterrestrial operating on our planet. He wrote in his wonderful story, The Journey of Baur Jed, that Pharaoh Djoser died 100 years before the events that Yefremov told us about. The expedition of Baur Jed was sent on a long journey by Pharaoh Jedefra of the 4th dynasty of the ancient kingdom. Now, the late Soviet Egyptologist Isidor Savich Katz-Nelson wrote that the era of the ancient kingdom of Ta-Kem, about 2880 to about 2270 before Common Era, covers the reign of the 3rd and 4th dynasties. It began with the accession of Djoser, during which his supreme advisor, the dignitary Imhotep, a brilliant architect, healer, and sage, later deified, erected the first step pyramid in Saqqara, near modern Cairo. Leonard Cottrell, author of the acclaimed book In the Time of the Pharaohs, in the USSR, by the way, it was published in 1982, noticed that the Egyptians remain a mysterious world for most of us. If the religion and customs of the ancient Egyptians seemed strange and incomprehensible to Herodotus, then what should they have seemed to the historians of the 19th century? What people/gods of antiquity does Yefremov mention in his story about Baur Jed? In preparation for writing it, he thoroughly studied the material. Are his diaries, notes, notebooks left somewhere? I've been asking this question for decades. I have a pretty good idea where they may be, but it doesn't help us. When Imhotep went to the repository of the shrines of Toth, the god of wisdom, he inquired in the souls of Ra. That is, he asked someone or something a question, like we ask the computer, for example. Now there's AI. He asked about the homeland of Hapi, that is, about the origins of the Nile. The ancient scientist, received an accurate and detailed answer. And what is it, those souls of Ra? The original text, translated into Russian by Soviet academician Turayev, reads like this: the 11th of the 42 great and secret books, called Souls of Ra, contains a list of all localities and the doctrine of what they contain. The scribe is the one himself. Ancient computer software containing geographical data. In 1996, I did not know things I know in 2023, as we all do, and how technology has expanded, and GPS and so forth. So, I do not want to expand this video to the borders of the Celestial Empire, but I have some information about the computers of ancient China, and you can find it. Just look in the playlist in my videos, which is another fascinating story. Maybe Imhotep turned to the people gods for advice, and did Yefremov know more about the first story of the Westcar manuscript, the magic of Imhotep? And most important, who was that miracle maker Jedi, and where did he get his powers from? This is what I wanted to let you know today. I didn't make it very simple and we are looking for clarity to the extent possible. But this is a fascinating subject, the history of ancient Egypt, which I think is not completely understood, of course, by our scientists. And we may find out that it was part of a much more ancient civilization, be it Atlantis or something else. But we should keep looking. I want to thank you for your attention to my work. And if you like my research, you can help me. You'll find the links to do it in the description to this video. Please like my videos and subscribe to my channel.